EUPHORIA is undoubtedly a phenomenal show. It's only an 8-episode series, and if you haven't seen it yet, I implore you to check it out. It's on HBO in America and Sky Atlantic in the UK, and it teaches the most important lesson of all. Pretty people have problems too. It follows a whole cast of interesting and three-dimensional characters that on the surface level are all beautiful, almost what someone would aspire to be, the stereotypical high school jock dating a cheerleader. It's only when you see beneath that they've all been broken in some way or another. At the start of each episode, there's a fascinating look back at an individual character, to what made them into who they are. And in each and every one, at some point, they break. The veil of childhood lifts, and the real world turns its ugly head. But the most beautiful part of all of this is you understand why. It never excuses the awful actions of the characters, but you understand why. And with that, there's a lot of action in this show. And while yes, there's a lot of action in this show, I mean more about the characters getting up and doing something, showing and not telling. Through these flashbacks, as well as what the characters themselves do, it gives you a sense of the essence of these people. Nate blackmailing half the town, and Rue heartbreakingly trying to open the damn door. While at times it could appear very expositional, it never quite feels like that. As with Rue narrating the whole show, it's never out of place as they still add character into the voiceover. In my opinion, the characters are the strongest part of the show. For 3 episodes, Nate's dad has been shown to be the strong, stoic, potentially violent character. And so in episode 4, when it's clear he's going after Jules to find her after a temporary moment of weakness in front of his family, I was scared for her, not knowing how he'd treat her. In the confrontation, he was instead coy and lost it. He broke down, showing vulnerability. He was scared how this would impact his family if it got out. So instead of threatening her, he opens up and pleads. Almost similar to when he was called to the school by the police, who was literally sick with stress, presuming he'd been found out. The show treads a fantastic line, where you feel like you know each character on an almost intimate level, yet still have their actions be truly unpredictable. As it was then his son Nate both times that we had to worry about instead.
Here's what would definitely happen. You'd end up on a sex offenders list. It means no more college. It's gonna be very fucking difficult to find a job. And everywhere you go, for the rest of your life, you'll be harassed and spat at and treated like a fucking animal.
The show also wastes no time in telling you what you need to know. Instead of it being this long series mystery of who really is messaging Jules, it instead informs the audience and allows for these beautiful moments of unbeknownst tension to be built. And speaking of beautiful moments, it seems like the default surface level observation when it comes to television and film that it has good cinematography. And while that isn't to invalidate the statement, its cinematography is fantastic for the most part. When someone says EUPHORIA has great cinematography, it is seriously on another level. The constantly moving camera adds this kinetic energy and liveliness to each shot, which is infectious. It keeps the pace moving along and is an interesting way of going from a wide to mid to close-up, or the exact opposite. They said they did over 800 storyboards for each episode, and that planning pays off, with it drawing in your attention in an interesting stylistic form, which then means when it comes to a stationary camera, it holds the shot and shows you no matter how uncomfortable it is. You're just there with the characters. Almost the same way in Mindhunter, the whole series is on tripods until it reaches that moment, and to emphasise it visually, it suddenly bursts into handheld. Here it is also a great way of showing the teenage eye. To us anxiety-riddled teens, we pick up on every detail and play over it in our minds over and over. And so when something is important to us, we almost have a habit of pushing everything else out to solely pay attention to that one thing. This also in line with the fact that we have our unreliable narrator in the form of Rue. Not only is the story narrated by her, but it's also shown from her perspective, for the most part. Like with a rotating corridor while she's high at the party. Camera movement along with the bright colours help bring you into this beautiful world, which is completely immersive. I was wholeheartedly entrenched by it. Which adds to the main theme in my reading of the show. On the surface, everything's beautiful, and underneath, everything is broken. But that's okay. At the fair, for example, there are the bright fireworks and neon lights, but there is this broken family at the centre of it. which hide behind the beautiful surface and facade, emphasised even more by the fact that they win the chili contest. A24 and HBO are both studios of consistent quality. I love a large amount of releases in both libraries of films and shows, and was curious to see A24's efforts in television. I know they've made TV before, but this was my first experience with it. I am so grateful that this has been renewed for a second series. The whole show was a bold risk that definitely paid off, especially looking at the critical acclaim that it's now garnering. One of the main things I like about A24's body of work is the fact that they allow the artists to truly realise their vision. Or from what I've heard at least, they understand that making art isn't all about numbers, and while yes, that's an important factor when working with larger budgets and taking risks, I'd much prefer to see an artist's failure, with it being their honest-to-God vision, than to see something potentially a little bit better, but just bland or mediocre with studio interference. From listening to Sam Levinson discuss this, he said he had a meeting with HBO, and they said, right, now go and make it. And so that made him have full creative control of it, and they had faith in him as an artist. The whole story feels directly ripped out of Levinson's head, and hearing him discuss namely Rue's story is emotional, as he himself has struggled with the similar issues, and it's such a personal and important story to him that he needed to get it right, which he most certainly did. He is now one I'm keeping an eye on, along with the whole cast for that matter. I don't know how much was taken from the original Israeli show Hot, and how much is new and original, but to craft these characters, stories and ideas in a modular fashion is truly something extraordinary. This show hijacked my mind throughout the duration of the series, and I had a whole other video essay planned, but I needed to discuss Euphoria. Also, to get this out of the way, the show has more dicks than you can shake a stick at. But it never feels like an outright porn, but if it did, it'd have the best plot. This is a teenage show, and in having teenagers as the focal point, it doesn't shy away from what happens behind closed doors. It shows people at their potentially most physically vulnerable, and tends to serve a narrative purpose. I've not had such a raw and visceral reaction to a show in a while.
Yo, is anybody here friends with Jules?
Get away from her, you bitch!
With it not only having me on the edge of my seat, but it genuinely left me guessing where it would go next. This meant that moments like this had me holding my breath, as its unpredictable nature meant I didn't know if they'd kill off a character or injure them in a certain way, which is why I was relieved when Rue would come in to reassure us.
Stop! Stop!
Now, I know this looks disturbing, but for real, I promise you, this does not end in a rape.
Interestingly, this is also how Levinson wrote the series, as he didn't want to have this large arc planned out. He instead had these situations and let the characters guide where it went. As an aspiring filmmaker, side note, I'm doing video essays on YouTube. Of course I'm an aspiring filmmaker. But as someone who loves the craft of filmmaking, this whole series has been inspiring. From the outstanding production design, editing, naturalistic performances, to the ever so important writing. If HBO set the gold standard of what television should be this year with Chernobyl, then HBO also set the truly euphoric peak of what television can be with this. For me, the two stories I found most interesting in the show was Rue's journey, as well as Nate and Multiple Man over here. Their dynamic I found so fascinating, where he just kept pushing and pushing his son and sees his girlfriend as nothing more than a distraction.
What I know is this relationship you two have is not sustainable, and it's only a matter of time before it takes the both of you down.
And this storyline leads to the moment that had the biggest impact on me as a viewer, their confrontation. As it wasn't about violence or a physical fight. At this stage, Cal is still physically stronger and can hold Nate down, but with Nate spewing this hatred about his father, the man that made him who he is, and that is fucking powerful. Cal has to take a step back, and he just sits alone listening to the failure of his own creation screaming. He is powerless to stop it. All he can do is listen. Also, Zendaya is on top form throughout. I know to people who have seen the show, I'm just preaching to the choir, but to make Rue relatable yet still true to life is just a masterclass. From her previous work, this is a bold departure that doesn't feel like her trying to be edgy or adult. It feels like a natural progression as everything in the show is handled with care. She went to a vulnerable place and out of her comfort zone. It is a multifaceted performance that needed to work to tie the show together, and Zendaya truly embodied Rue, the beautifully broken addict. As closing remarks, I think something that's expressed especially in the finale is that everyone isn't as important as everyone else. As contradictory as that sounds,
If you look at everyone inside, most of them are gonna go on to live these lives that aren't even fucking worth mentioning. Not Jules. What about you?
Honestly, I don't really give a fuck.
we've been invested in these characters' stories, with all the little intricacies, yet anyone walking past them in the hallway could have something just as interesting going on in their lives. But that doesn't mean they'll amount to anything, or any less. Not everyone is going to cure cancer or go to space. Not everyone is going to become the next Brad Pitt. And you know what? That's fine. That's beautiful. That's natural. People have their own ideas and their own lives. Their own victories where they get the girl or successfully frame somebody else. We're with them. Not necessarily supporting them, but with them. These are beautifully broken characters, and we care for them when they succeed as well as when they don't. When they're blackmailed into a corner, when they have no choice between a rock and a hard place, there's sometimes victories that also defeats, and defeats sometimes are a relapse. Here was a great little Q&A from some of the cast as well as Sam Levinson, which I'd recommend checking out if you want to explore the behind the scenes of the show even further. I've barely scratched the surface here and would love to explore the show again in another essay. But for now, thanks for watching.